We're live on Instagram.
Holy cow.
And YouTube.
Yeah, we're gonna.
And YouTube.
I mean,
You.
well, halfway into our conversation, we're gonna have people finally rolling in on Instagram. So
Good old
we'll
YouTube.
probably cut this down a little bit on YouTube. Cut it down.
Cut it out.
Cut it.
Cut it down. Cut.
I'm done.
Well, you
I
actually
quit after this
want me to do some extensive editing? That's below my pay. That's what my pay grade is.
I'm not getting paid enough to do this.
Welcome to the Truth Seekers podcast.
No, I mean, I can't.
And okay, so we'll do an official countdown now that we're
That's easy as
already
shit.
live on YouTube.
3, 2, 1.
And we're live. Welcome back to the True Seekers podcast. I'm your co-host Josh Allen.
And Nicholas Carter,
And I'm Dalton, the misogynist Cantrell.
the misogynist mustache.
Oh, you're really
The
sticking with that, aren't you?
misogynist.
He's really.
I am. I'm
really
still
good.
salty about
You're
that.
really-
For anybody that's concerned, I'm still very
That was the
upset that I was
third
considered a
podcast.
misogynist.
I saw her comment.
Third podcast. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, when someone attacks your character, it's not a joke. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just
you gotta
defending
stand up for
myself.
Shut up,
To the face.
Hey.
Oh my goodness.
I'm probably not gonna get anybody on here, am
In the face of fascism,
I? No.
one must protest. Am I right? Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Hey man, bro.
What's the topic?
Who said what?
Whoa! Are we putting a label on
They're
this?
asking too
What's
much
the
of us right now.
topic?
Who's someone's live?
Are we?
Brandon Hunt.
Keith Holton. What do you
Keith
mean?
Holton.
That's
Hello.
I can't read. I'm a little.
It's definitely a he.
Okay, so I'll get down to business. We're going to talk about socialism today.
Ooh.
I know it's such a wonderful topic to talk about. We've been
fucking
asked to talk about some controversial topics, and so we decided that socialism would be a good one to start with.
Straight to it.
It's something
Straight
that
to it.
has plagued our country, or the idea of bringing in socialism has plagued our country. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss it today, kind of break down some pros and some cons, what socialism is. We might even dive a little bit into what socialism leads to, i.e. communism. So this is going to be a little philosophical, but it's also going to kind of be based on historical fact, and there will be some opinions because I don't think any of us here lean towards socialism. So you'll get to hear it all here on the True Seekers podcast. I believe this is episode 7. Is that right?
Yeah.
Episode
It's
7?
episode 7.
Okay, it's episode 7. We lost count after 3. It's gone downhill. So,
It's gone downhill.
yeah. So either way, let's get the show rolling. Ball rolling.
Yeah,
Whatever the term is.
So I believe we should start with the current situation in America, kind of some of the common misconceptions
Yes. Let's do it.
of socialism. So
Common misconceptions of what socialism is.
yeah, so okay. First of all, what we're seeing right now is socialism is actually being pushed. It's being sold to the younger generation for a reason. And a perfect example of this would be in colleges around the United States. It's going to be hard for me to speak on this just because I'm not in college, which is why I actually want to ask Dalton and Nick a few questions. What are some of the experiences that you guys have seen around campus? Any sort of suppression or of freedom of speech or any strict guidelines around it or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, I mean, as far as freedom of speech goes, I've told a lot of people this. When I worked with a group called Turning Point USA, I was a chapter president at MTSU, and my job was to host events and work with all the other conservative groups on campus, so which was kind of limited to college Republicans and anybody involved in the Turning Point chapter. And one of the big things that we faced with our largest event that was called the Free Speech Ball. So it's a giant 8x8 beach ball. And so we would roll this thing around campus and give everybody the ability to write whatever they wanted on it, because that was them expressing their right to free speech. And so we talked about this a lot with the students. We handed out packets and informed them. And I don't know, it was probably the first event, and we were probably maybe an hour in, and they came out there and told us that we could not roll this thing around campus, and we had to stay situated in one specific area called the free speech zone. So we're on a public campus, which means that that campus is theoretically owned by the state and also owned by the public. because it's forwarded up by the public. It's put up by the public.
Tax dollars.
Taxpayer dollars. And so we were told this the first time, and basically as the one leading the event, I kind of ignored it because I thought it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. I was like, whatever, it's a beach ball, who's it going to hurt? And so by the second time we had done the event, we actually had people that came out there frequently to make sure that we were doing what we were supposed to do, which was stay in one specific area. And so we were given the opportunity we were given the option of either you can host the event in one of these two areas, which based on MTSU's bylaws were labeled as the free speech zones. For those viewers that are familiar with MTSU, there's one out in front of the student union. It's the grassy knoll in front of the student union, and then the other one is the kind of grassy knoll area in front of the KUC. And so we were told, well, you can't roll it around, but you can put it right here in these areas and wait for these people to show up, and then you can get their attention. So that in itself was a limit of free speech. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but it kind of ticked me off, because one of the things that you're supposed to get when you're on a public campus is, you kind of get that freedom. You get the well, I guess you're under the assumption, if you're a smarter student, one of the more informed, that you get this idea that they have to abide by things just like the government does, because it's put up by the government. So it's this idea of the Constitution and what we're granted. If I'm on Vanderbilt's campus, for instance, it's a little different. I went and helped Belmont do the same event, and it was different because they have the right as a private institution to say, well, we only want you to do it in this area, we don't want you doing it everywhere else. And then it's not like you're arguing that they're necessarily taking your right away, because theoretically they have the right to do so since it's private property.
Right.
So yeah, I've seen that at MTSU. I've also seen in the classroom as a political science major, or political science and history major, I've seen this idea the idea constantly thrown out that capitalism is bad. So it's not necessarily the idea that, we're propping up socialism, but it's constantly this never-ending dogma of how capitalism is bad, or how capitalism can negatively affect people, how it creates this separation between individuals, and so therefore creating competition creates controversy. And so without saying that there's a better way, or that they support one way or the other, they're constantly dogging one while kind of supporting the other in silence.
Right.
So
It's kind of like they're saying capitalism promotes class struggles.
right, exactly,
There's class social
exactly.
structures.
Well, and that's a huge benefactor for socialism, is this idea of class.
Well,
it's the fact that everybody's in the same class, and so they're saying,
That's what they want.
Exactly, because that's what they want, is this total equality over or all over the board, and that doesn't happen with capitalism.
Equality
We know
outcome?
that.
Yeah, they want equality of input and outcome. Well,
My account. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, what were you saying, Nick? Sorry about that.
we were talking about outcome socialism. This is the definition. I've got a definition written down.
Yeah, let's go over the definition.
Definition of socialism. This is my summary based off of various websites, so I think it's pretty straightforward.
Are any of them CNN?
No.
Okay, I just don't want to double check.
Maybe like the way of the future. CNN's website.
Okay, continue. What were you saying?
A form of government which imposes centralized government control of the economy, including production and distribution, with the aim of eliminating class struggles. So in other words, a form of government which controls all means of production and distribution of wealth to its citizens in order to create an equal society, i.e. a utopian future.
Singular class is what
Yeah,
you're
it's
saying.
one class. Everything that has to be done currently, all the jobs out there that are glorified and not glorified, and trying to push off on other people. People don't want to do certain things. Every single job, whether it's cleaning the streets, unclogging your toilet, so be it. The barista, those things are going to be done regardless.
Right, so it's kind of the idea that the means of basically everything you can think of have some sort of control, if not complete control of the government.
So all of those people would have getting
If
basically
they're
the same
getting paid,
paycheck.
Well, yeah,
exactly. So if
so
they're
what
getting
is-
paid to do it, actually not 9 times out of 10. Let's be honest. 100% of the time, if you're getting paid to do it, it's controlled by the government under a socialist
Okay.
perspective.
So this brings up a lot of red flags for me. But first, the preface or the premise of all of this kind of comes from an individual, right? It's Karl Marx. Is that
Mhm.
like anti free trade or anti capitalism? Is that the idea? Because I haven't done a whole lot.
A
of
little bit
research
of the history of kind of socialism. It's been an idea for a very long time. I mean, if you equate socialism to utopia, where people are theorizing what would be the perfect world, the perfect way of running society, that's been going on for a very long time, all the way back into the ancient Greeks, Socrates, and all of them. So
ancient philosophy.
it's basically been an idea for the most part of history in terms of utopia, but a little bit of history. I've got a couple notes. There's a French revolutionary named Francis Noel Babou. He's credited with the idea of doing away with private property. So, and that was in the 1700s.
Oh wow.
In the Industrial Revolution.
Was it in the 1700s?
Well, yeah, these ideas have
what
been
time
around for
was-
quite a while.
Yeah, well, around what time did John Locke come up with the idea?
He didn't come up with the idea.
Well, not the idea, but he popularized it in the United States, right?
Socialism?
No, John Locke and the idea of property. He was responsible for popularizing it.
I don't know the exact date. I mean, we can definitely look that up, but I'd say it was theoretically thinking John Locke. It's probably close to the same time period.
Yeah,
It's
so
in the
he was like,
1700s.
it was like, yeah. So essentially, he was
Yeah.
opposing.
Yeah, he would
Well,
definitely.
meaning he might have not directly been opposing John
But the
Locke.
idea,
It's a when you're looking at it from a historical perspective, socialism has kind of always been there, because as long as there's competition, even though it might have not been under the name of what we call socialism, the idea of, like Nick said, this utopia, or this idea to where like the utopia is controlled by a government, that is socialism. That idea has been around for a long time, probably since mankind came up with economical and bureaucracy structure for any kind of nation. So it's kind of hard to argue that, man, and it keeps falling over. Look at that. That's amazing.
Keep it down there, actually.
It's been around for a long time, but I mean, it's something that we really need to discuss when we get into like Karl Marx, is this idea that
When did Marx come around? He was in the 1800s.
God, I'm not good with dates, but yeah, it was
Early
close to the
1900s.
1800s.
Is it early to mid?
Because he was around like
It was
the
1800.
Well, and it was after Marx that all of this stuff actually
Yeah.
became something. So you have to realize that Marx died and kind of died a nobody. His book that he enslaved his entire life for, because this is a man who, remind you, basically gave up everything in life to become a student in a library, to write his Communist Manifesto and to write many other publications. This was a man who propped up the ideas of Marxism, socialism, and then the eventual turn into full-fledged communism. So something that's important to know for people that don't understand this is that socialism is actually considered a pathway to communism. So what you actually see is that socialism is kind of the soft input in the beginning. That is what the government puts into play whenever they're hoping to turn tide from a capitalistic free trade market kind of government to communism. So socialism is what gives them kind of the open door to say, well, we're going to slowly but surely take control over certain things, and then in the end, the long-term goal is to lead to communism. So I actually had somebody ask me a question: what is the difference? The difference is with socialism addresses the kind of economic programs. It addresses the economical structure of the government and of that nation state. That is what you would consider socialist. The idea of communism revolves around what kind of bureaucracy you have, yet alone it also involves the economical structure.
So the difference between, this is just for personal.
Yeah.
The difference between communism and fascism, would socialism not lead to both?
Well,
It
I
could
mean,
be
it theoretically
because
could.
it could
When
lead
you
to-
when you start swapping terms like that, and you look at things like communism, when you look at things like capitalism, fascism, a lot of that also addresses the kind of government that's in play. And so when I say government, I'm not talking about the economic system. I'm talking about the kind of leadership roles you have in place. So a lot of times with a fascist government, you actually have what you would consider it's really a totalitarian government, and fascism is the route in which they take. That usually emphasizes complete and total control over that said government underneath
Yeah,
whoever that
sounds-
totalitarian leader is.
Sounds very similar then.
Yeah, well, I believe
In terms of authoritarianism.
kind of like if you look at socialism as like at its foundation, fascism and communism are both like of that family tree.
Yeah.
They just go in a little bit different directions.
Authoritarian.
In communism, the government has complete authority over the means of production and
Exactly.
What is going to be done in terms of the economy. For example,
But it's the government as a whole, though, with communism,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because it's not like it's one individual; it's the government.
It's the party.
Yeah, exactly.
But all the examples that we have, if we want to look at that, the head of the party ends up being God essentially.
Yes.
But back to like to distinguish between fascism and communism. Communism is that government which owns the economy completely, decides everything. For example, in Soviet Russia, Vladimir Lenin and then Joseph Stalin, they both decided to take control of agriculture and how it would be the whole process within agriculture, because that was like one of the biggest parts of their economy at that point. But in fascism, it's kind of like the blending of capitalism and socialism, from my understanding, because of it's basically socialism with capitalism infused. Instead of the government completely owning all business, you still own it. It's just taxed at an extremely high rate. And if you look in, I guess historically, stumbling. You got this?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, if we're
There's
just
a really fine line.
really, there is a fine line, and so the problem is again, we've tried to label everything. So we try to label every theory, we try to label every idea, and give it a specific name. It's not hard to do research and look up what the difference is between the two. The problem is understanding the difference between the two. So a lot of times with fascism, what you see is to where like they might not necessarily control all the means of production. And so before we get off topic, I'm going to kind of end this right here. Fascism might not control all the means of production or the means of everything in general, but you owe them the means of the things that you create. Does that make sense? So like you're in a fascist-like government, a lot of times what you see is that even the stuff that you produce, part of that still goes to the state regardless. In communism, everything belongs to the state no matter what. You see what I mean? So you're making money, but it's all being fed back into a pot to come right back to you anyways. Fascism is more, a lot of times what you see is more of a military control. You see that fascist dictator, that's often a term that's used. Fascism is also probably a government-like system that has been used to kind of overthrow a previous system. But
Like Adolf Hitler and then Mussolini, they were members of various socialist clubs.
Yeah.
So like, they were socialists that they saw things that were wrong with communism. So that's why Russia and them they were
They overcompensated.
they
a little.
were they were very much opposed during World War II. So I think that they were trying to still have what?
The mic to your
The
mouth.
mic's got to be right against my mouth.
Well, you're having
Yeah,
it
for the
tilted
audio.
out
it
this
has to be.
way.
It has to be directly
It's
in
for
front
the
of your
it's
face.
for the audio.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, lost my
Try
train
to
of
do
thought.
it this way. You talk.
You were basically discussing the difference between Soviet Russia and fascist.
Yeah,
Germany.
Well, I mean, it's like I said, when you simplify this so we can get back to socialism.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so I'm going to give you kind of some definitions here. Communism is a system based around a theory of economic equality and advocates for a classless society. So it removes the idea of any kind of caste system, class system, etc. Fascism is more of a nationalistic top-down system with rigid class roles. So you play your role You see what I'm saying? Like, you play your role in society. Not everybody is theoretically equal in fascism, but you play your role. And usually, like I said, it is ruled by an all-powerful dictator. So it's a little different. You have a dictator, right, in one, and really in communism, you don't theoretically have a dictator. You have a ruling government party. So yes, there might be a head of that party, but theoretically speaking, because these are all political theories, that is the difference between the two of them.
Okay.
So on our way back to our discussion with socialism,
Sorry.
since no, it's okay.
Yeah, I was
it's
just
okay to
curious. Like,
ask
I really
those
wanna-
questions.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're differentiating the two, so that I'm not confused continuing the conversation. Because I'm sure a lot of people that are listening probably don't know the difference either, because we went through the same
That's true.
general education system, and we weren't. They maybe touched on it for like a class or two, but I forgot it. Did you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't.
Y'all had to reteach yourselves probably, didn't you?
Well, yes. I mean, you also got to think we live in a system that it's not going to necessarily teach you all of the pros and cons of one system or the other. They like to kind of point fingers at whatever it is they don't like.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's where we live right now. But I kind of wanted to, excuse me, I'm dealing with some, upper respiratory stuff. But I wanted to start tonight with, again, let's get back onto the idea of socialism. I kind of made a list. I made a list of 10 pros and cons of socialism, and we'll only go through a few of them because it will bring up talking points as we go. So the number one here, do y'all want to start with the pros or the cons?
Start with the
You want to start with the pros? Okay, so the number one pro I have is every citizen will have access to education and health care, because education and health care, and you see this right now in America, everybody believes that education and health care is a right, okay? It's not, it's a privilege based on the nation that we live in. It's a privilege, just to make that clear.
Yeah.
But in a socialistic state, okay, education and health care would be produced by the government and given to you based on the amount of taxes that were paid in order to fund these things. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's the number one pro. If you're an advocate for that, maybe this is your route. But yeah, that's the number one pro. It's this idea that every citizen would have access to education and healthcare. All right? The number two is this results in a classless society. So something you see a lot in this country, even right now, is that we tend to fight a whole lot about where everybody lands. Are they middle class? Are they upper middle class? Are they upper class? Are they top 1%? Are they in poverty? You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of, we have divided ourselves, all right? And we've given ourselves classes. It's hard to say that capitalism in itself gave us these classes, because if we are, we're admitting that money is what makes, or your equity or your net worth is what actually puts you in these classes. And that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around that. You know what I mean? Because that would, well, for those that believe that money makes the world go round, then it makes complete sense.
Well, we're talking
But-
about economic classes, though.
Right, we're talking about
Yeah,
economic
so that, I mean,
classes.
it is-
So,
it
I
would
mean,
be money,
It would have to be
but
determined by.
you
Yeah, but
have
in the idea of
autonomy
a
to change that.
Right, but I mean, they are speaking of a classless society, yes, in an economic sense.
And
So-
the class system that's kind of like sprung in our system. Yeah, I think it does kind of come from capitalism. It comes from the economy. I mean, it's just kind of like the freedom for everyone to put in as much effort as they want.
Yeah,
into
exactly.
something,
But then you
whatever it
also got to hope that everybody has this like general will to put forth effort, and I'm going to get to that in the cons at some point, because that's kind of the idea of socialism, is that everybody's willing to sacrifice all these things to actually benefit everybody in general. You know what I mean?
is. It seems counterintuitive.
Exactly. So on to the next one. It allows for balance of wealth and earnings. So this is a big one that honestly, everybody that even asks about socialism, that's what they ask, is like, well, it's the theory of, well, how much would I earn? Well, you really don't know, because something that you actually get with socialism is probably a real large spike in taxes to actually pay for all of these things. Because think about it, you've got to pay the government more for the government to actually distribute an equal amount to everybody. So the only way this would theoretically work, and we'll get to this in the cons, is higher taxes. But yes, it's the idea of having a balance of wealth and earnings. 4 is it kind of eradicates this idea of monopolies and corporations, because again, that's something in capitalism that we see. It's this proponent of everybody can be their own boss, everybody has the ability to be successful no matter what, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, that kind of idea. So that would be gone, null and void in a socialism like government. So now we're going to have a discussion on the pros. Okay? So I had some questions for you guys. Do y'all think that any of those things that I've named are actually possible to get done? Why or why not? And then, do you think that we already do those to some extent?
Can you ask one from one of them specifically?
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
go
okay,
down,
so
we'll go down
I'd
the list
love to
and
start
how-
with one,
Yeah.
okay, because that one was a big one for me. The idea that everyone will have access to education and healthcare. How do you feel?
I feel like we've. Okay, this is a hard one because you gotta learn how to like draw the, or not necessarily draw the line, but differentiate between a social program and a socialist country. But
Well, social programs are theoretically
yeah,
a part
so
of it.
so essentially, what we have right now in the United States is a social program,
Yeah.
K through 12. Everyone has the right to go to school.
Mhm.
They have that freedom. It's zero. It's basically just tax dollars
Yes.
that take care of it. So we have that right now. But the interesting thing is we're still complaining about it.
Yes.
So does that really? I'd say no. That's not even. It's not even positive for us right now.
So it,
Right,
doing-
well,
and
I
we're
mean,
doing
but
it.
think about it. The funny thing is, you bring that up. It's this idea of, well, everybody needs access to education and healthcare. And let's just, for right now, we'll stick on education for what you said.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, Josh. You're right. Everybody that talks about public education talks about how much it sucks, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they all learn this basic idea, K through 12. It's the same stuff over and over again. It's repeated. They're not really learning, so they're therefore not becoming intellectual.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not actually becoming intellectual or intelligent based on the things that you're learning. You're kind of taught this idea of memorization because in reality, that's the only way you could do that and make it easy. You know
yeah.
what I mean? That's the only way you could make it all around the board fair and equal,
Yeah, so
right? By
the
teaching the exact same thing to everybody.
Yeah. So right now, I mean, there are only a certain amount of people that actually have the opportunity because it's the learning style that they learn.
Exactly.
Under. But it's not the whole idea. The whole social program is to offer an equal opportunity for everybody and to kind of level the playing field for
Yeah,
them.
to
but
give
they're
everybody
not.
a
But
fair
they're
chance.
not doing that because they don't have the funds to do it, and
Well,
two, and it's not even really a possibility because they're
Exactly.
never going to have the funds to do it.
Exactly, and I mean, you look at it year in and year out. Our education system, the public education system, is constantly underscoring. It's not producing the amount of graduates that it needs. You see a lot of schools and a lot of school districts nowadays that fudge their scores and stuff and boost these certain areas.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's the thing: if you're there just to get, your diploma and say, "Oh, look, I graduated high school," well, good for you. Okay. But for those of us that are trying to benefit ourselves, what can we take away after high school and say that I actually learned? You know what I mean? And so you look at it from a public education standpoint as a social program, and as a social program, it has been a failure.
Right, that kind of segues right into like what like my con about that program
Exactly.
is. It's like, okay, the idea that everyone will have access to the same education. In theory,
Yep.
that sounds so beautiful, but when it's the same education brought to you by the federal government,
Exactly.
they're determining what we're learning and how it's being taught, and we've seen that it's not as easy as they like to make it seem. They've been struggling since the Board of Education became a national entity. So to take it even further into university, I think doesn't make any sense. It's like, before we do that, before we take your program into the higher education, how about you prove that it can work on a
Exactly.
lower level?
Yeah.
And they've already shown that it can.
Well, yeah,
and you
and-
look at like,
well-
if you look at like private schools,
Yeah.
their students test higher than those from public
Exactly, and
schools.
you have
Yeah.
these people, and you want to know why these private schools out in the middle of nowhere are have these academic scholars that go on to become Rhodes Scholars and stuff. You don't see them graduating from a public high school most of the time. You see them being prepared in some kind of private environment. I mean, you see
It's specified towards
more
the type
people
of
through
students that they have.
homeschool that become higher level academics than you do from public school. And so at some point we have to look at that and say, is this social program failing? That's up to you to say yes or no, but the biggest question is if it is failing, what do we do next? Because we continue to put people into this program, and yes, I understand that some people don't have the money to send people to private school, right? But maybe that means that we should change the way we educate everybody in that in that social program, in that public education. Maybe we should change the way we do things, but we haven't. We've kept the same platform, you know?
Yeah, maybe
But
allow
that's-
more competition.
But that's the-
allow
but
the
that's
states
the
to
ch-
have their own programs.
That's what makes it such a realistic plan, though, is it allows the opportunity, if you're willing to work your ass off and give your children that type of life, if you're willing to work your ass off. But if you're
Right.
not,
But if you're not, it's you just
bare
get
minimum
to,
is
yep.
what you get.
C's,
Well, that's
C's
what-
and D's get the degrees.
It's kind
Yeah.
of like that system with it's just kind of promoting. It's promoting people to compete. It's competition. You know,
Yeah.
there's only so
Well,
many
is that
goods.
fair? Is that-
Yeah.
Well, we thrive off competition.
Yeah, I mean competition creates the best products in the world. You know,
Exactly.
America, all the innovation that's ever come, really, the technological innovation has at least started in the United States
Well, I
for
mean-
the most part.
Exactly. I mean, look at this. If you just take two different phones, so let's look at like the Android operating system in phones and then the iOS operating system. So obviously we're talking about Android phones in comparison to iPhones. That would have never blossomed into what it is now, to where each one of them is always having to go back, create a new one with all these kinds of minor upgrades that make it better than the previous model from the competitor. But see, they have to do that. That is competition, because without that, they would not stay in business. If iPhone made an iPhone 1 and that was it, and there was not competition, that company would stagnate. They would go, there would be no more company.
And from
You
a
see what I mean?
consumer's-
Competition has continued their growth.
From a consumer's perspective, if you that's a good thing.
Exactly.
You want the competition, so you have options, you have choices.
Exactly.
You have a Rolodex of choices. You have 5 different phones you can choose from that are all
Exactly.
high quality.
for the market.
Yeah, it's great for the
It
market.
is.
So if you look at education, if it's all centralized by one government, one entity,
Well, you're doing
you don't
more-
have any options.
Exactly.
If
You're
it's
doing
not
more damage
working,
than good.
if it's the best program ever, woohoo, we're all winning. But the likely
But it's
scenario
not.
is that it's not.
It's not. Look at it. Look
It's
at these
not
countries.
perfect, and then you don't have any options to go elsewhere.
Y'all remember when we learned about Singapore math? We'll go on to the next topic after this, but do y'all remember when we learned about Singapore math? Did y'all learn that in high school? It's like a specific way of doing math equations, and I think it was called Singapore
Was
math or
this-
something like that.
I saw a
This
video.
was about God, what was the name of that entire program? It was around the same time as the No Child Left Behind.
Yeah, it was kind of the same thing, and they taught us Singapore math, and the idea in K through 12 was that you start these kids in this program they called Singapore math to hopefully bring them up to level. The reason it was called Singapore math is because the highest averages in the world on these math scores came from Singapore. And so we actually, in hopes of raising our averages and our scores, brought this
We tried
this
to
idea
globalize
to our education system. And so in that alone, we're admitting to the fact that someone else had used a better program that was not a copy and paste program all across all 50 states. Singapore was doing something that we weren't doing. So, you know, as we move forward with that topic, that's something I want you to take away with education, is this idea of like, if other people are doing it, why is it that we continue to lag behind in that idea? So number 2, if y'all want to do that, I mean,
Yes.
So what do we have to say about the classless society, okay? And go.
So to create a classless society.
Yeah, what are the pros and cons of creating a classless society? We kind of talked about this in the last one. It removes competition and stuff, but I want to hear individual opinions from you
The
guys.
utopian pro would be that you cannot covet over your neighbor's stuff. It's like it's like, okay, well, I'm not jealous of my neighbor because he's at the same level. That's the idea, but we know that wouldn't be the truth.
It's the idea that we'd be living in harmony if we were all receiving the same
but
wages.
that doesn't change.
think
that
about
doesn't
it.
change human behavior just because.
Exactly.
Just because you set it up differently, there's no reward system for the which is exactly what we operate off of.
So there's
Yeah,
this
it's
thing,
like a
it's
lifeline.
called, it was called something virtue in the Anti-Federalists. It was civic virtue. Okay, so this is a kind of off
Thomas
topic,
Jefferson?
but it's an idea here. Okay, so the idea of civic virtue for the Anti-Federalists was that people would basically use their, or kind of like in their soul, they possessed civic virtue, and civic virtue would lead them to want to be involved in government, right? But the idea is, and here we are looking down the road hundreds of years later, people don't care about civic virtue. That's why people choose not to vote. So although it sounds like a really nice idea, we would leave it up to civic virtue, and that's how we would determine who does what and who controls what. It's through the people's civic virtue. We're doing the same thing. It's like if we take away the competition, if we take away the classes, and I know this is about to sound crazy, but by removing classes from our society, you remove the urge to want to do anything. Because if everybody's living within the same class, what makes you want to do anymore? If I know I'm going to get paid at the end of the month regardless, and I'm not getting paid more than him, who's to say I'm not going to go into work, do a little bit, text on my phone, and then call it a day? You know what I mean? Because why work 8, 10, 12 hours
There would be no.
when there's no point in doing that in the first
do
place?
we not see that with minimum wage jobs now?
You see it already. You see people that are on disability and they don't have the urge to get off disability because we've told them they can make a certain
Well,
amount
they
no matter
look
what.
for social programs like that to take advantage of the system even more.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, I'm on minimum wage. He's on minimum wage. I see him over there not working hard, so I'm going to work even less because I know I can get away with it too. Okay, well, how about I fake an injury too, so I can take a disability as well. That way I can sit home
Exactly,
and do
because
this.
disability looks so golden. That's their idea.
Yeah, so I think that's a terrible idea. I don't think it would ever work.
Yeah, I mean, in a classless society, there seems to be no natural motivation to work and to improve.
Yeah, no, it's-
There will be an incentive because
Of
shit has
course.
to be done, but it's not
Exactly.
going to be a natural like reward system. It's going to be, hey, you better do this.
Well, yeah, and you
And
also
it's going to be the federal government,
Exactly.
police, the checka, going to be making sure.
You're nuts.
They're going to
You're
be making
nuts.
sure you do your job. I mean, that's what they did in the Soviet Union.
Well, that's true. And I mean, think about it like this. Would you not create classes? At some point, you're going to have people that are automatically going to go, you know what? Screw this. I don't have to work. I'm not going to work because I'm getting paid regardless. And you're going to have people that are like, well, I mean, I'd rather do something. I'd rather kind of work. And then after working for a little bit and feeling like they're still propping everybody up because they're the ones working, you know what I mean? Because you still have to have some sort of means of production, right? So if at a factory, if 50% of the people at the factory decide, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore because I get paid regardless, the other 50% is still going to have to go in there and work, or you're not going to have that product.
Well-
You see what I mean? And so at some point, you're going to create a divide and a rift between these people because unless you chain them there and force them to work, they're not gonna. Nobody's gonna do that.
Yeah.
If you're, here's the thing: the only thing that in my mind that is keeping these people working these long hours and crazy shifts at places like Nissan is the fact that they know they're getting paid at the end of the week.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
pretty well.
And pretty well. But if you told them that everybody there is getting paid the same, regardless of the work that they put in, why are you gonna stay?
Yeah.
I mean,
And
why are you gonna clock in?
And within that system, the taxes would have to be so damn high.
They are, and that's something we're going to talk about in the
So,
cons. Is
there's
that
even
taxes
less-
would have to be unbelievable
There's
to
even
fund
less
all these
motivation.
things.
There's even less motivation to actually put
So-
forth great quality
So
work.
wait,
and
wait,
effort.
go back to what you were saying earlier though. What is the incentive then if that's the case?
If living in that situation.
Yeah, what's the incentive? Like, what's
That's-
the reward?
Well, the only
reward
the only
is to-
incentive is that you're going to get something no matter what.
Well, really, the reward is that you're not going to be put in jail. If it's controlled by the state is ensuring that the economy is going to flourish.
They're just going
So
to force you to work.
your incentive is to survive, and that's
Your
it.
your incentive
don't-
is
you don't
that
have
you
a-
aren't punished. It's avoiding
Yeah,
punishment.
but yeah. So when I say incentive, I mean the
reward.
an actual
That's your
reward,
reward.
yeah.
In that
Yeah, that is your
situation.
reward.
In
Your
that
reward is the
situation.
ability to like say, you know what, I'm not going to get locked up because they're going to need me to work because somebody has to be the means of production. But you know what, I'm going to go into work and just kind of screw around.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the idea here.
Yeah, but so the
you
idea
have
is
to work hard.
Yeah, so you're
otherwise
just-
you would be put in prison.
yeah. So you're literally destroying the level at which somebody lives. It's like the
quality.
quality of life.
Because
Yeah.
your quality of life is already guaranteed. It's already been set in stone. It's the
Exactly.
same as everyone else's.
Yeah,
So you're not striving to improve your quality of life. You're really only striving to preserve.
Yeah, so we'd be regressing in that situation. Like,
Well, I
I
mean,
think
let's
it's
talk
fair.
about the idea of removing a classless society. Where this comes from is the fact that they make this argument with the top 1%. So you have the extremely wealthy on one hand, and you have the poor and less fortunate on the other hand, right? And so the idea is to bridge the gap between them. So no matter what, everybody's not necessarily wealthy and everybody's not necessarily poor, but they do live what they consider to be a happy and productive life,
Which
right?
yeah,
But
the theory, right?
that's a theory.
In
That's a
practice, it
theory
has
in
never worked.
practice because it's never worked, one. And two, again, if you remove, we're human beings, and you can see this no matter what your religion is, no matter what your philosophy is, every single one of them breeds this idea that you have to have some sort of competition to continue going. Okay, because if we lived in a classless society and we didn't have people that were continually pushing to be better, if we didn't have people like Bill Gates and like Steve Jobs, okay, where would we be? You know what I mean? Where would we be? We would potentially get stuck living in a specific time period.
Those people
For
started
instance-
working in their garage as high
Right,
schoolers. Like,
exactly.
You don't have that opportunity in a
Exactly.
in a communist
Exactly.
existence. That's just not going to happen.
It doesn't work that way. So, I mean, if you think about it, the idea of having a classless society, you look at it, you go, oh my God, that's fantastic, because it makes my heart so warm, because I feel like everybody's going to be okay. But when you look at it through a logical lens and not an emotional lens, okay, and like we talked about masculinity last week, so logic is considered a masculine trait, not a male trait for those listening, because I am a misogynist, remember? It's a masculine trait. It's not a feminine trait. A feminine trait is to look at things through a intuitive/emotional lens.
Yeah.
So if we look at this through an emotional lens, we go, well, that's great, because all four of us sitting here at this table would make the same amount of money off this podcast, and we would do the same amount of work no matter what, right? But in reality, all we have to do is get up here and talk through the mic while Alex spends all of his time setting everything up and making everything perfect for us. That's not equal, okay? But if you look at it through a logical lens, you look at it and say, you know what? Some of us at this table are going to have to succeed to a higher rate, right?
Yeah.
To encourage the other ones to keep going and do something different. Therefore, you kind of start spinning these wheels of what we consider today the free market.
We ought to
Yeah.
reward leadership.
Well, yeah.
Exactly.
What
The
is
leaders-
in biology? What is that? The ecosystem?
Oh, like,
That would be an ecosystem.
yeah, that would be an ecosystem.
And it's a biological fact. There's such thing as ecosystems where there are specific roles in essentially a dominance hierarchy.
Right. Well, and I think we should just go ahead and go on to the cons, because the next two are it allows balance of wealth and earnings. We kind of just talked about that within there. And then it eradicates the idea of monopolies and corporations. So in talking about those, we've kind of already talked about those.
Yeah.
Can we agree on that?
Can you say that? Name them again.
Okay, so it allows for a balance of wealth and earnings, and it eradicates monopolies and corporations. Again, those all kind of go back to the idea that, again, we're ignoring the fact that competition is something that's needed.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
We can agree on that? Okay. So let's go on to some cons. These are going to be fun. So the number one con I have listed is it gives government too much, if not full control.
Okay.
So the big red flag that's going to fly up for anybody here is that that's not what this country's based on. Okay, this country's not based on a government having control. It's actually based on the fact that people have control of their government.
Yeah.
Okay,
Liberty, right?
we agree on that?
Yeah.
Right.
So what do we have to say about it? I mean, where do you think that would send us?
I mean, it would,
If we
it
give-
would dramatically, it would fundamentally change the United States.
It wouldn't be-
We would no longer. We would have to get rid of the Constitution.
We would have to adopt new ways.
Yeah, everything
Yeah.
would have to change. And personally, I don't think that's a good thing.
Mm-mm.
You know, the standard of living that I have, and most people I know, it's pretty decent. You know, and it's been the product of the system that we're in.
Right.
And it's, you know, we're the wealthiest nation of all time. You know, obviously money's not everything, but what it does, it does allow for, it allows for more freedom of choice. It allows for more comfort. It allows for things such as modern medicine to develop, and, you know, cures to develop, and, you know, systems like presumption of innocence to be intact.
Right, and we wouldn't have
And-
those things again without competition, without some sort of competition. I mean, look at like the space race. Would have any of those things happened if it wasn't rooted in deep competition between who could get someone there first,
Right.
who could get something done first? That only happened because of competition.
Competition drive the best innovation the Soviets
Exactly.
ever put forward was their space program. It was because they were in direct competition to
Yeah.
the United States. They wanted to show that communism would be the best.
Exactly.
That was what it was. It was like communism's racing to the
Well,
moon.
yeah, and they wanted to show that they could do the same things under a communist system.
But
you
without
know?
the United States proposing it, you know. Like,
Right.
Well, that was similar to Germany with their technology in World War II as well. Like the scientists that basically created new technology in the world, or in the
Well, yeah, and the Germans had a lot of their genetic testing and stuff like that. That
Well,
again was
U-boats
trying
were
to
an
put
example.
themselves above everybody else.
Yeah, they had
Yeah.
like, some of the best technology that we had.
some of the best scientists. Even,
Yeah, that's how they got the best technology.
Yeah.
I don't know. So we had to match it, otherwise we would have lost.
Exactly.
That's why we were losing. Like in World War I and II, Germany went out to a strong lead. both times.
And okay, so the biggest one, again, because a lot of these are going to lead back to the same thing, which is kind of funny, but that is the root of socialism, is this idea that everything is classless, everything is equal. So, of course, a lot of the rebuttal for that is going to go back to, well, what are the negatives of that? And the next one, in my mind, and for everybody else, is how is this going to get paid for? And the answer is taxes are going to have to be higher.
Yeah.
We complain about taxes right now. Oh man, my cigarettes are too expensive. Dude, chill out. They went up 13 cents. You know what I mean? Oh man, this gallon of milk's too expensive. Well, it's called convenience.
And
You know
then it
what I
goes
mean?
down,
Yeah.
it fluctuates.
Yeah, and
It's the
everything
market.
fluctuates. It's like you scream and yell about gas, and then it'll go right back down. You know, so like the gas station that I work at, we had the most expensive gas in town for like 3 or 4 weeks, probably even longer than that. It was at like $2.75, something like that, right?
Is it Portland?
So
Motherfucker.
within the last week, we found a different distributor and whatnot to bring our gas in. It's now down to $2.56. We're now the cheapest gas in town. We're cheaper than Kroger and we're cheaper than Walmart.
Because there was a
You know,
competition.
but it's because there's competition that drove it,
you
right?
found a better product.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
better
we
provider.
found a product that, or we had a need for a product, and then we found a competitor to the person we were getting our gas from, and they said, you know what, we can offer you a better price for that, and that's competition. So now what are we doing? We're bringing in capital, or a lot more capital, because our gas went down. You know.
Competition's
and
a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good
Flat
thing.
out.
And so this idea is like, I'd love to see people either in the comment section or later on, what do you think about that? The biggest thing that I have to say to anybody about socialism is, if you have to accept the fact that your taxes are going to be higher, are you still going to be happy? Because you complain right now about taxes. Most of us do.
Yeah.
You know, oh, what about these taxes coming out of your paycheck right now? You think they're bad now? If you have to have free health care, free education, and everything, oh my God, your Social Security, let's go ahead and triple that. Okay? Let's just go ahead and add extra zeros behind everything. Maybe not $55, maybe like $100+ now coming out of every paycheck or more. You know? And so we don't even know what that looks like, but we want to argue the point that it's better, but we refuse to accept the fact that at some point in life we're going to have to pay more to have that
And
lifestyle.
good luck not paying your taxes.
Yeah, and good luck not doing it, because it's going to be taken out regardless.
Hey, Alex has something to say.
Now,
What's up?
could you put a number to the tax rate? Like, how high would the tax rate be?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think that's probably going to be something that's controlled by the government. You know what I mean? But
'Cause I think I saw a video that said like Bernie Sanders, his tax percentage would be he was pushing for like 9%.
For like upper.
yeah, but that was also for like an upper
Yeah.
Look
class.
up proposed tax rates. I know. What is the woman from New York? The
BernieTax.com.
Okay.
Ocasio Cruz.
Ocasio keyboards.
Yeah, I mean, she's basically
Well-
said she brought up all these different things, like the social programs that you just described.
Yeah.
And even housing, guaranteed housing. Everyone has a right to housing.
Yeah.
All these things that the government should be able to provide. And she was like, yeah, of course the question is, I always get it. How are we going to pay for it? It's like, well, we already have the funds. She's like, we already have the funds. They're there, as if the money is literally hers, as if the government should have any
Well, see,
ownership over the money that's in
exactly.
the market.
And there's another
so
problem.
it's literally what she's proposing is to just increase the taxes disproportionately to like the rich. And she said something that was kind of misleading. I was watching a video. She was saying that the 1%, that we would just be taxing the 1% more heavily. And she was like, and don't worry, it's not. We're not talking about just upper middle class or people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of millionaires and billionaires. And then I looked up the 1%, and to be in the 1%, I think you need to earn a roughly $400,000.
Yeah, you're not even
You're
really
not a
millionaire.
billion.
You're not even a millionaire or even close to a
Yeah,
billionaire
so she
yet.
literally flat out
Hey.
lied.
I have people
This-
that I know in this area that are in the class. Do you have a question over there?
Well, it's not a question; it's a statement. So
Okay,
I want
let's
to
hear it.
actually like read it out loud for the
Yeah, do
guys
it.
on YouTube
Do it.
listening in the audio. So Wes Cantrell,
Uh-oh. Former guest.
former guest,
twin.
brother over here said, similar to what Oliver Curry stated, classless society is possible, but just because you eliminate class doesn't mean that people won't try and create dominance
Exactly.
over
That's
their peers.
exactly. You're completely right, Wes. That's what we were saying earlier. Was this idea that you can maybe remove the idea of a classless society from that said society, but it does not mean that you're going to remove the innate structure in a human being to
The
say, you know what,
biology
I'm going to take control.
Yeah.
Okay, because then what happens? So we live in a classless society, so theoretically no one is my boss, right? Because they're not technically getting paid more than me to tell me what to do, right? Okay, well, that, again, if somebody steps forward and goes, you know what, we need some organization, therefore I'm going to step up and be in charge. Well, now all of a sudden we're not in a classless society anymore. You know, so that, I mean, that makes sense. I think that's really, again, that's something really important to pay attention to. Is like, yes, you can say you live in a classless society, but does that mean you're removing the idea of classes from the individuals?
I mean, it's essentially working against biology and evolution, like human evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, like why would we want to go against thousands and thousands of years of evolution?
Millions of years.
Yeah, millions of years of deep-rooted biology that, you know, we're wired to act this way. Why the hell would we go against that?
Well, the thing
it's
is
only making our lives harder.
Right, and you could argue that mankind is actually more of a follower than they are a leader, right? That's why we follow things like religion, okay? So for instance, a lot of our leaders, and I mean, I could be completely wrong on this, so somebody correct me if they want, but I look at it from the perspective of like, yes, we have the ability to be leaders, but most leaders also follow somebody else that they believe has led them to become a leader. Okay, so for instance, like the Pope might be the leader of the Catholic Church, but he is still following the same person as all of the people, or the same deity that all of the followers of Catholicism are following.
Yeah.
So everybody theoretically has somebody that they follow. So it breaks down that idea of class structure. Even though you might be the said leader, you know, you're still following somebody in yourself. So you're creating that already.
That's what archetypes are.
Yeah, exactly.
Any problem ever had is nothing new under the sun, I believe is what the quote is. I'm probably butchering it. But
You might be butchering it.
Nothing new under the sun.
That's what we do
essentially.
here at
We
the
butcher
Truth Seekers
things.
podcast. We like to butcher things and use a lot of ums and so's,
Dalton,
and we don't
can you
use our
just-
commas.
Dalton, can you
It's
just
actually called the
for a
Uninformed
second
Podcast.
just go with it?
Yeah, I'll go with it. I'm
Just
sorry. We suck.
We're changing our name to the
Okay,
Uninformed
Dalton.
Podcast.
Maybe they didn't notice until you mentioned it like that.
Dang. Sorry about that, y'all.
I'm
Not
just kidding.
professionals here.
Not professionals.
We're experts, clearly.
We
We're having fun. You know?
the smartest in the world here. So
We are the smartest in the
we
world.
are the
here, absolutely.
and we are very humble, as you can tell as well.
I have a certificate back home my mom has framed that says that I'm special.
So I must be.
Our mom
But that
teaches
creates a
special
class in
ed.
our society because you're special, and my mom told me that I wasn't. So, dang, I'm just kidding, Mom.
Hold on,
Because I know my mom
we have
watches
proof.
this.
Hey Wes, is that true?
I know that that's not true, Mom. I know you love me. Okay, so something else that I want to bring up, and again, this is
Put a
another
heart.
con. We like to say that, again, we dislike higher taxes. Another thing we like to say is that we dislike bureaucracy. Am I right? We all hate the government, okay? And we all hate the government now because we say the government is a proponent of these dividing factors that we call and root under the idea of capitalism. But how much are you going to hate bureaucracy when they control everything that you create, everything you say, and everything that you do? How much are we going to hate bureaucracy when they have complete control?
Right.
You know, so that's another con. That's something that we, you know, could theoretically discuss in really any governmental structure. But for socialism, that's something that we really want to pay attention to. A lot of these people that are calling for socialism tend to forget that there is this idea of having a bigger government in that situation. Are you using filters on our story? Gosh.
Just let it happen.
No,
I
just
kind of
let it
like
happen.
it. I kind of like
Can you-
it. Nick looks good with red lipstick on.
Take the fucking filter off.
Hey, language. We got children watching.
We do not.
We don't. Children
Um,
watching. What does the fox?
What did you just say? The last thing you just
Are you
said.
ready to turn this into bullshit podcast?
No.
Okay, so what I was saying was, for those of us that weren't paying
Sorry
attention
about
to
that.
the filters that
Hey,
Josh
yo,
was using
yeah,
on
I was paying
Instagram.
attention. You were the one that
This-
directed it towards
the
me.
idea, another idea of socialism that's deeply rooted that in socialism to the point to where it wouldn't work without it is the fact that there has to be some sort of government bureaucracy.
Yeah.
We like to complain about bureaucracy right now and say that it's a bad thing and, oh, there's too much bureaucracy. Well, the same ones saying that, or some of the same ones saying that, like Bernie Sanders, I believe he said that multiple times, we need to step away from this government bureaucracy. Okay, so are you an anarchist or are you a progressive socialist? Because the idea of progressive socialism and socialism in general is that there has to be more bureaucracy to achieve the things that need to be achieved
What is
in
bureaucracy?
socialism. Government control.
It's like kind of like the
Martial
government.
law.
Well, it is,
No,
yeah,
it's the bureaucracy is like the mechanism
in
that
which-
allows for
that allows for government to do the things that
Yeah,
they're doing.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like it's all the government employees. Essentially.
Exactly.
all this stuff that goes into
It's like you hear people called bureaucrats. We have enough bureaucrats in D.C. Well, yeah, we do. You're right. Thank you for pointing it out.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
You know?
damn right.
We need less of them,
It's
apparently.
hypocritical too.
It is.
It happens on both sides.
It's really
the worst part
hypocritical.
about it.
Well, just because we want to, or I'm trying to. A lot of people who say that, are trying to prevent us from becoming even more bureaucratic.
Yeah, you're right.
So, a lot of things that bureaucrats control typically go slower.
Definition for bureaucracy.
Yeah, let me see it.
Definition of bureaucracy.
All right, for those of you that are not enlightened, we're going to give you the definition of bureaucracy. It is a system of government in which most of the important decisions are made by state officials rather than elected representatives.
It's made by the public.
Okay.
State officials, people that work for the state.
It almost sounds like all these different definitions you bring up are almost saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Like socialism, communism.
Wouldn't it be like
bureaucracy.
a DMV?
DMV is
bureaucracy.
a good
DMV would be a
example
form of bureaucracy.
Public people working there.
It's
Yeah.
and you think about public transit, all things like that. I mean, it's interesting. And a guy named Steven Crowder, he's a very interesting.
Louder
guy.
with Crowder.
Louder with Crowder.
Yeah, like
He's a comedian who
Is he or is he a political pundit?
he's a comedian who
He's a
does
comedian.
political.
Yeah, he
talk.
calls himself a comedian.
Oh, so he's a less serious Ben Shapiro?
Wait.
yeah.
You're
Comedic
right.
value at 100.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But he's a French Canadian, so.
He's actually born in the U.S. though. He grew up in Canada. He was born in Detroit.
Oh, really? Okay, never.
So he can actually run for president if he wanted to.
Interesting.
He won't.
So
He won't,
but he
but
he,
he
he
can.
was raised in Canada.
Yeah, he was raised in
Like
Canada.
Montreal.
Speaks French.
Yeah.
Like all out French Canadian for sure.
And on the topic of like social programs, brought to you by the government, talk about Medicare was one of those things that we were gonna speak about.
It's another socialist
Healthcare.
program.
Yeah. And he was saying, from firsthand experience, the wait time for just a regular appointment is much higher.
Yeah.
If you're scheduled to meet at 5:30, it ends up being like 6:45.
Well, yeah, and you look at these things like even with the ER. You know how you see
Yeah.
those signs going down the interstate? Like that used to not be a big deal, but because of the fact that we have given more access, right? Or easier access
Opened
to
up
those
the
people,
floodgates.
it's opened the floodgates. So when you drive down the interstate and you're going to Nashville, it's like, hey, don't freak out. TriStar Medical down here has like a 45-minute wait for the ER, and it's like, okay, I
I'd be
could
dead
die
by
in
then.
45 minutes if I'm going. I mean, if it's serious enough to go to the ER, you know what I mean? But that's something that we're doing. We're giving everybody the standard of emergency treatment, okay? At the risk of like, oh, I just broke my finger. Well, I'm going to go to the ER because I can because it's free underneath TennCare.
Yeah.
Or something of that sort. You see what I'm saying? And at that point, it gets a little ridiculous because you could go down to your local PA and have him put a stent on your finger and you'd be good to go. But no, you know that that's free, so you're going to go to the ER. That's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
And our system isn't totally socialist.
No, it's
obviously.
not.
So
We
it's
just
like-
have social programs.
Yeah. Well, in like places like Canada and places in Europe, the mortality rate I believe is higher in terms of like when you go under the knife, you have a better chance of
Really?
dying.
So you have a less chance of making it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well,
Wow.
if you think about them getting in there later,
Yeah,
just think about it
yeah,
that way. I
okay.
mean, they probably have just about the same quality of doctors, but if
Right.
if you're a
They probably
doctor,
eat better,
when
too.
you're seeing, if you're a
Because we're
doctor,
severely obese.
We are
well,
terrible.
if
Look
you're
at your co-host Dalton Cantrell over here. I eat beef every day.
Yeah.
Severely obese, high
Heart-
blood pressure.
Yeah. Heart disease for sure. 100%.
Go ahead.
What are you
I
saying?
just-
What are you saying? Sorry.
I forgot, it doesn't matter.
This is our podcast. No, I'm
That
just
is not true. You did not forget.
You did.
You were talking about going under the knife.
Yeah. So you were saying that the mortality rate goes up in Canada
And
Do we
under
know
the
that?
knife.
what?
Do we know that?
Can you?
You want to fact
Yeah, hey,
check
could
us?
we
Yeah,
actually
you wanna
fact check
fact
that
check
real
us,
quick? I
Mr.?
mean, Snope, was it called Snopes or Snoops or what's the website called where you can fact check stuff? What is it called? Come on now. Scopes or Snopes
I think
or
it's-
I think
Snopes?
most people are looking at democraticparty.org.
The
DNC.
Okay, so
or
in the
something.
meantime, while Alex is looking something up for us, I actually had a question on my personal account, and this person asked me, where do I go to find to find fair and equal data on candidates in which they should support.
Okay.
So honest and open data.
Hold that thought.
Yeah.
we're going to restart the Instagram because it's about to go off on us.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go right ahead.
Stay around, guys.
We've already been on for an hour.
Yep.
Yeah,
This has been a free-flowing conversation.
I think the life expectancy in Canada is actually higher.
Okay, Alex, you
Yeah,
can stop pointing out the
life.
facts.
No, the life expectancy. Yeah, this was my point earlier. They eat better than us,
Yeah.
so of course the life expectancy is going to be.
We weren't
higher.
just looking at life expectancy.
We were
What
looking at
was like
specifically
mortality
mortality
rate.
rate once you go under
it's
the
hard to
9.
find
I know,
a
yeah.
strict like percentage or whatever.
Yeah. So
Well, you're
you
not
want to,
looking
and
hard
we're
enough.
back in live,
Yeah,
but
not.
yeah. So basically, we were basing that off of. We're basic. That's the only way to really. What are you doing?
Okay, back to what I
Okay,
was
okay,
saying
back-
real
back to
quick,
Dalton, back to
so that
Dalton.
we can all understand this. From my perspective, I was asked to answer a question from a young lady who follows me on Instagram, and she sent me this and said, I've looked up numerous sources and whatnot. What's a good source to find kind of valid facts and information about candidates, who I should support and who I shouldn't support, and this is why. There is one that I like to use. It's called isidewith.org. I believe it's .org. And with isidewith, you actually can take a test which has the questions are generated based on how you answered the previous question. Okay, and so what it does is when you're done, it kind of aligns you with where you would stand based on your answers with a party, with a candidate, et cetera, et
So
cetera.
personality test, kind of.
Somewhat, to some extent, but also at the end, something that you can do is you can click on the candidates, and there's a full profile of that candidate. Okay, and so a lot of these candidates, for instance, Ted Cruz has actually, or somebody from Ted Cruz's office, because I know it wasn't Ted Cruz, has answered these questions also to show you where Ted stands on certain issues. Okay, and it's called iSideWith. You can get on there and you can look these things up. So for people asking, iSideWith is a good one. I can't remember the other one. Hold up, I wrote it down.
So that one's essentially based around things that you want.
Well, yes, it is,
So
but it allows you to kind of
iSide-
figure out where you are. But it also gives you kind of a perspective of where these candidates stand too. So it takes their issues. So, like for instance, Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually has a section on iSideWith where it tells you where he stands on certain issues, and then based on your percentages, it says, well, you're this close, or you have this percent of the same views as Donald J. Trump, right?
So it's almost like a compatibility test.
Yeah.
Sure, we can call it that.
That's what it is.
Okay, and the other one
We're going
is
to call
called
it
VoteSmart, votesmart.org. Okay, so with
VoteSmart, okay.
votesmart.org, you can actually get on there and you can look up specific issues if they are previously elected or previously holding public office. You can actually look at things that they voted on yes and no.
Yeah.
And that's important too when you're making up your mind, and that's called votesmart.org. Other than that, the real number one thing for finding somebody you wish to support is really just looking them up, listening to what they say. Their website will tell you what issues they support and what issues they're trying to resolve, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can do that too, but really do your own research. You'll probably find more doing your own research than you will from certain websites. Because certain websites might stray you one way or the other. Certain websites might not be up to date. But if you follow those specific races or those specific candidates, and we're talking at a national level here, so like if I was trying to look up something about Marsha Blackburn and Phil Bredesen, it's not going to be hard to find because she's previously been a congressman and he's previously been our governor. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I can easily
You can
look
even-
up
you
what
can
they've done.
Wikipedia them.
Exactly. You can look them up and see what they stand on and what they voted on.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of what I was answering with the in-between, because Alex was trying to fact check something for us, which I don't think he successfully found.
No, he did not.
But anyway,
We'll go with my
back
version of the truth.
back to socialism here. The general idea here and what we're trying to discuss with this podcast isn't to sway people necessarily away from socialism or what it is they believe. We're trying to. Okay, Nick is trying to sway you. I'm sorry. The idea here.
Every single one of us has said that socialism is
Okay,
it's
socialism
wrong,
sucks, I'm
it's
sorry.
bad, it
Well,
sucks.
if you're strictly looking at the pros and cons list, I would say our decision's made for us based on that list.
Well, yeah, of course it is. But I mean, the idea here is with the
history.
Truth Seekers podcast is we provide information and then you make up your own mind. If you feel as if we told you something false, please try to correct us. Try being the key word.
Yeah.
Because we want to be able to have a conversation about it. But overall here, something that I think is important for people that are looking into socialism is this idea that do you really want to give up certain things in order to the only real positive that you get out of socialism is this idea of a classless society.
Okay.
That's the biggest thing you get out of it, is that there's a classless society. That is
your neighbor is not going to have more than you.
exactly, and that's
That's
the biggest thing about it. There really aren't many other
Shit.
pros.
Yeah, it
you know,
It sounds so horrible.
yeah,
sounds
it's
like
bad.
such a-
It's like
Not gonna happen.
It's just-
Exactly.
I mean, it could happen. That's the scary part.
No,
That's
it
why-
ca-
well, and
Yeah.
the even scarier part. Let's test Nick's knowledge here, and you too, Josh.
Great.
What was when Karl Marx discussed the ideas of Marxism and the ideas of socialism? What was his purpose in discussing them? What was he trying to eventually lead us to?
a dictatorship of the proletariat.
In other words, what? Communism.
Communism.
The
Okay.
flipping of the. It's really, I think it's important to, if you hear the term Marxism,
Run.
Run, throw your books away, burn your Bibles, because that's what's going to happen.
No,
either
yeah, I
way.
mean, do your
Marxism-
research, but be careful.
Yeah, be very careful.
So the question is, like, what is Marxism? It's another one of those political theories, economic theories, that essentially, Karl Marx created. He wrote the Communist Manifesto. A lot of his principles were adopted by the Soviet Union, and the Bolsheviks and all of that. But essentially, what it comes down to is, if you were to implement Marxism into a society, you have to identify a group of people who are being oppressed.
Right.
And then you have to then identify the group of people who's oppressing that oppressed group,
Exactly.
the marginalized group. And then, think about it. If you were to firmly believe that you are part of a group that's being marginalized and oppressed, and that there is a specific group who's doing it, that would make you pretty angry, right?
Mhm.
If you knew that was a kid, if you knew it to your core,
Yeah.
what are you going to want to do? You're going to want to stop them for one, and then overtake them. That's the whole idea. That's how you motivate revolution. That's what they were doing. That's what the Bolsheviks were doing. So, that goes hand in hand with socialism, because socialism has to overtake capitalism. It has to overtake it first for it to be implemented. So it fumes revolution.
Well, I mean,
So
he
if you-
calls for, was it called the proletariat revolution?
Yeah.
I mean, he called for that. That's this
The-
idea of this working class revolution. That's what it was with the proletariat revolution. It was this uprising of, you're the proletariat, you've constantly been treated like this, and this, and you've always been under somebody's foot or under somebody's hand, and now it's your turn to rise up and take control.
The bourgeois.
Sounds like
Bourgeois.
The
a
bourgeois is like the upper middle class.
Sounds like a
Bourgeoisie.
union.
Yeah, the unions came up around that time.
Yeah, it sounds like a union.
Well, yeah.
Okay,
It
so
is a
here's
union.
something I wanted,
but
that
I
go
guess
ahead, Nick,
I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to kind of equate that. It kind of helps us understand things as a whole in terms of the implementation of these ideas. And then if you look at like modern day, and it's because socialism is still being attempted.
all over the world,
Yes, for sure, Venezuela,
especially
happened
here
there.
in America,
But it's
in the
Marxism.
streets of Denver,
Marxism
in
is-
Chicago.
Stop.
Marxism
Let him talk,
itself
man.
is no longer specifically economic. It's not. They're not identifying the proletariat and the bourgeois, these economic classes. It's more of a cultural, societal, race based, or it's dependent upon race and gender now.
Yeah.
It's identifying that specifically minority people of color have been and continue to be oppressed by a certain group of people, and they just so happen to be white, and they just happen to be men.
That
So,
And
Yeah, I mean-
masculinity is now tied
Wait,
into
before-
socialism.
and that's exactly what's taught in school. That's what
yeah, I
I'm
know,
taught
but
in school.
that's what turns me off about it, is because the entire mindset is based off of essentially racism and sexism. Like nowadays, like that's
They're
literally
cute,
what the
yeah.
entire thing's based off of. Yet that's their biggest cry, is that other people are racist and
They believe
sexist.
that the system itself is racist and sexist because
Yeah.
it is ran by men, and there is a patriarchy that controls the whole system, and
Yeah.
that's why it needs to be flipped. It's
White
literally cultural
male
Marxism.
That's where that whole term white male privilege comes from, which is like,
Mhm. Yeah, which is really interesting. Is like in theory, it's kind of like we're like mapping out. Like we identify these people. Like this is what they're doing. This is cultural Marxism. It's like as if they were. You would want to hide that. Like these people are trying to implement it. You would think they wouldn't want you to know that it's coming from a playbook. But when I walked into class, I was shocked by one of my professors. I'm not going to name names. I actually like this professor for the most part. I think she does a really good job of teaching the information. But my question, my issue comes with the content of what's being taught. And she flat out said, "I am a Marxist feminist." So
She told you
She
that?
said
You
that?
she
said
said
that
that
in class?
the first day of class. And she was like,
Wow.
and you might not identify yourself as a Marxist feminist currently, but by the end of the semester, you just
You
might.
will?
You
She
just
said
might.
that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Your professor said
Your
this.
professor.
Yeah.
I've had a professor that claimed to be a feminist and
Straight to
claimed to
politics.
be.
Yeah, and this is English.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
this is
not a
English?
political
This is how we.
science.
This is how we interpret
That's
literature. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh my
So something I
gosh.
talked about with Nick that I figured actually I know I wanted to share with anybody that is listening, and it looks like we have quite a few viewers. Don't mind me wincing in pain, my hamstrings cramping as I speak. So the idea here that I discussed with Nick was that with all of these younger generations and our generation specifically that are proponents and advocates for progressive socialism, they fall into either two factors. One, they're ignorant to what they're saying, or two, they truly want communism in the long run. And this is why I say that. A lot of these people that supported Bernie Sanders would not be in favor of having a communist government. Okay, they would not be in favor of having a communist dictator, a communist government, and all of what that means.
Yeah.
But they are big proponents of socialism because that is the direct opposite in their mind of capitalism. Okay, and so they actually, in my mind, are ignorant to what it really is, because a lot of these people that I have ran into that are proponents of socialism, and even those on campus, on my campus, that are proponents of socialism, they don't fully understand this idea that we can't just go from capitalism to socialism and stop. Okay? Because this idea that in socialism that we've now given the government control, what does that lead to? And where does it stop? This is what I discussed with Nick. Once we give them control over one thing, what's to say that they're not going to take complete control? What's to say the bureaucracy isn't going to take complete control of the means of production and the means of everything else? Now we're talking full-fledged communism.
Nothing is static, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not static.
Things are
because it can't-
growing or
exactly.
digressing. You're either
Exactly.
progressing or digressing.
Well, so and I always like to relate this back to my job just because it's something that I experience on a daily basis, obviously. So, what a lot of trainers or managers, like in any sort of sales role, they'll talk about negotiation. And rule number one in a negotiation is to not back down.
Okay.
So if you give them an inch, what they're gonna do is say, "Oh, I got you now, sucker. I
Right.
got you now. What else can you give me?" It's like, okay, you've already discounted this much. At first you said you couldn't discount, now you're discounting, so what else can I take from you?
Right.
So that's basically the same idea. It's
Like
like,
smelling blood.
yeah, it's like a shark smelling blood. It's like, where's your friends at? Where's your friend?
You're hurt. You have a weakness. That's really what it is. It's
Yeah,
like, you have a weakness.
they're gonna exploit it.
Mhm.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's
Human nature doesn't go anywhere.
It's the same. Yeah, it's the same. It's social dynamics essentially.
Yeah.
This is basically what goes on.
What is the quote? Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely,
Yeah.
for the most part.
I'm going to stretch real
You're
quick.
stretching.
Yeah, because
So-
I'm
You
hurting.
cramping over
Dude,
there?
my hamstring is still cramping. I did squats the other day and I apparently can't bend over.
I
Coming
squatted
at you
eating
from the
the film
Meathead
the other day.
Podcast.
Huh?
The Meathead Podcast.
I mean,
It's not a meathead podcast. I was sitting down and my hamstring started cramping.
yesterday.
We are pretty buff, all of us.
Actually, I didn't know that statement applied to anybody at this table.
Yeah. See, I'm not gonna. I'm not even.
I'm
gonna-
modest.
If we're talking about relative to the
I'm
normal
modest.
population, we all are.
Okay, relative to the normal population, because the normal population is fat.
Oh,
Specifically
We
in
need
the
to get
United
back
States.
on socialism.
You
We keep
fat
getting off
fool.
topic with these things that don't really matter.
I'm tired of
Whoa,
socialism.
they matter.
I'm tired. of
Everything that we
socialism.
You're tired of socialism?
I'm getting tired of it. I don't want to hear anymore. Democratic socialism. Let's vote it in. Come on, let's do it already. Let's just vote it in. It's good. It's democracy. Are you don't like democracy, dog?
No, I
What are you trying to
No, I
say?
don't.
That's un-American, right?
I thought we were a republic.
Wait, what?
A constitutional republic.
Wait,
We're a
don't use the R
Democratic
word.
Republic.
We're a
Don't use-
democratic republic.
don't use the
emphasis,
R.
emphasis on democratic. What is the root
Why
word
can't it
of
be a
democratic?
republic?
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Democracy.
Don't.
We're
What are you
democracy.
calling my democracy? It's a daily show. This is my democracy. Don't let them take our democracy.
Someone's building a straw man.
Build that straw.
You're building a straw man.
God.
You're right.
Okay, so
I love straw.
I guess.
Back at it.
Well, yeah, we can get back at it. I just, I think we've laid out enough information. I can't believe I stuttered there. We have laid out enough information for most people to understand why they would or why they would not support socialism. And I just kind of want to encourage everybody to, again, like we've done in the last few podcasts, take that step back and start to try to analyze what's going on around you. Because most of the time, these people that are wanting to implement socialism, they have an ulterior motive. They have something else going for them. Think about it. If you're an elected official and you're talking about how you want socialism, what's eventually going to happen is you're going to be in charge of that bureaucratic system that then has control over the people that voted for you. Okay? And so, to me, there's some sort of ulterior motive that's involved there. And I encourage everybody to look into it and do their own research, because it's hard to say that one system does well without the other, right? Because we've already agreed that we have social programs here in the United States as a democracy.
We'll also discuss whether or not they work well.
Yeah.
Right,
they
and
don't.
some of them don't. But it doesn't mean that we don't
Some?
have them, and it doesn't mean that they don't complete a purpose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If they were to
We're-
work properly, I mean, they definitely attempted. to
But
work.
well, okay. Well, back to the whole. Okay.
I'm in a weird mood. No, I wasn't.
No,
shaking.
you're good. I don't know what that was about.
What?
Nothing. We're good.
What was about?
Nothing. We'll talk afterwards.
I wasn't shaking anything at you.
No, you're good. We'll talk afterwards.
What are you talking about?
Okay, and we got off track. I think, we've been in this for what, like an hour and a half?
Yeah.
An hour and a half? I mean,
Hour and 15.
I don't see anything wrong with going ahead and trying to close it out. I mean, I think we've stated our points. Again, not all of our podcasts are meant to be 2 hours long or 3 hours long or anything like that. It's kind of just at the rate in which we get things done. So we again wanted to bring socialism to the table to discuss socialism with everybody, because we found it important to again have a discussion about something that America cares about. So as America as a whole wants to know more about socialism and cares more and more about what it is and what it could do for this country. So we were just wanting to kind of address that and let you guys know how we feel about it. Again, you can follow us on the Truth Seekers podcast on Instagram, and I believe you could subscribe to our YouTube page. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and let's not forget that if you do appreciate this podcast, or if you do appreciate the information that they bring, don't forget we have a website, and if you're actually interested in the podcast, you can go on the website and schedule a meeting to come out and hang out with us, to maybe even give us a topic idea. It doesn't matter. I mean, we're going to change things up regardless, but we want everybody to know that this podcast involves you guys as much as it does all of us. And so, we talked about socialism tonight, and we also talked about being competitive. And so we're trying to be a competitive podcast here. So, we're going to do the best that we can do, and we just want to do it with y'all's help. But we're glad y'all tuned in tonight and listened to us blab on about socialism and how much we love Bernie Sanders and
Yes,
what's her face from New York,
Ocasio.
Ocasio-Cortez or whatever her name is. But yeah, so Dalton,
Ocasio.
before Dalton signs off here, again, I just want everybody to remember, do your own research, figure out what you want, and hopefully don't lean towards socialism, because I hope we've given you enough emphasis on why it doesn't work and what works better. And remember, competition drives everything.
Right. Socialism.
My mic's working.
Oh, it's working.
Is it on?
Oh, it's on now.
You're good now.
I'm
gonna leave with this.
Socialism will definitely
Bring
bring
us equality. That's for sure. Brought to you
from the
barrel
barrel
of
of
a
a
gun.
From the barrel.
Read Soviet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just
Wow.
look in
The Soviet Union, and
You'll see that
that's the case. You can look at Cuba. You can look at China. You can look at Venezuela,
Venezuela.
now.
North Korea.
North Korea is similar. Yeah, I mean, it's just not the way to go. We're gonna end up having to implement things by force. So Say no to drugs. Say no to Bernie.
Say yes to
Get-
marijuana
get involved.
Bleed red,
Yeah.
white, and blue.
and hemp.
Love America. The Constitution's good. These are things that must be accepted. That's
Yeah.
it. There's your
And-
indoctrination for the night. Josh?
Yeah, and okay, so back to the guys that are listening on YouTube. He mentioned it earlier. I'm gonna plug it again. Our Instagram at Truth Seekers Podcast. Make sure you follow us there. Get involved in the conversation. We're gonna shout out any guests that mention us. We want to do something really special for the first adopters or first fans of the podcast. We want to be very, very involved with you guys. We want to be involved with everyone, but we believe in the whole competition. First come, first serve. We believe in that. So get involved at Truth Seekers Podcast on Instagram and follow us at the Truth Seekers Podcast on YouTube, and post any questions. DM us on Instagram. Do what you will. We'll try to answer it on here. You guys have a good one.
I'm gonna be the first one shot.
Goodbye, YouTube.
Bye.